Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels following week 2, and this was another pretty interesting batch of episodes, and there's actually quite a bit of changes to this power ranking here, though I feel like that's to be expected considering how the season is going so far. But there are 21 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 21, we have the first boot from this week, and here we have Tobias, and obviously Tobias was probably unlikely to win considering how quiet he was in the edit, and also him just being in a pretty bad game position here. Now, I will say that within the episode itself, there were definitely some warning signs that he could be going home, namely his one confessional coming right after the immunity challenge, where he talks about how he's safe because he's one of the providers of the tribe, which is usually a pretty bad sign in terms of your actual chances here, especially when someone like Alex seemed more of a decoy boot for this round anyway. And again, I feel like Tobias didn't really bring too much of the show. I was pretty low on him in the preseason, pretty low on him after week 1, and obviously it makes sense why he goes out here. And obviously with him out of the game now, he is here number 21. Now moving on to number 20, we have the other boot from this week, and here we have Nathan. And this is sort of the opposite of Tobias, someone who I was pretty high on in the preseason. And it's kind of funny just how wrong I was about these people coming into the season, where literally my top 3 of my preseason power ranking are now out of the game, which is pretty funny. In terms of Nathan's edit, I feel like he was probably not long for this game considering how bad his week 1 was, and even his week 2 is pretty bad, where his only confessional comes in his boot episode, where he gets a confessional talking about how it's been good that they haven't been going to tribal since this majority doesn't seem to value challenge strength, sort of foreshadowing his eventual downfall there. And yes, while there was a serious potential to flip the vote onto Caroline, who had also been dunked on the edit, I feel like Nathan going out here isn't the most mind-blowing thing either. So yes, I was pretty wrong on Nathan as well in the preseason, sort of someone who failed to live up to my expectations, but obviously he is now out of the game, which is why he's here at number 20. And with that, there are 19 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win based off their edit and current game position. But number 19, the person I believe is the least likely to win from this point on, is Kitty. And the thing about Kitty is she's kind of taken over Scott's spot as the most invisible person on the show, where she is now the only person remaining in the game that has not gotten a single confessional after 6 episodes, which is obviously a pretty bad sign, despite her being part of the majority, where she is part of this middle-aged mafia that should be running things, and we even see them running this latest vote. The fact that Kitty still hasn't gotten much content on the show is a pretty bad sign for her moving forward. Now, yes, she could have this turn that we've seen with other players in the past. However, I feel like at this point, it's pretty unlikely that she's going to win the game based on how invisible she is on the show, which is why she's here at number 19. Now moving on to number 18, we have someone kind of similar to Kitty, and here we have Rihanna. And this was a pretty bad week for Rihanna, all things considered, where again, she gets no confessionals here, despite her being kind of relevant to what was happening, where she was very likely a target coming into the episode 5 tribal that was a non-elimination, where had that been a normal round, there's a very good shot that she goes home there, which is all pretty bad. And the fact that she gets no confessionals, no chance to really respond to anything that's going on is pretty bad. And obviously the fact that Kirby was the one getting the bulk of the credit between the duo is all pretty bad as well. So again, I don't think Rihanna is very likely to win either. The main reason I have her above Kitty at this point is that I feel like she's at least attached to Kirby. I feel like that connection is more established at this point compared to anything Kitty has, to where I feel like there's a slight chance that Kirby and Rihanna could get more content in the future, then also they could become more of a force within the game. But I feel like the fact that Rihanna didn't really get a chance to respond to what would have been a pretty bad situation for her had this been a normal round is such an indictment to her overall chances that I have her here at number 18. Now moving on to number 17, we have another person who has gotten 0 confessionals this week, and here we have Charles. And again, Charles is also one of the more invisible people on the show, where while he did get a segment during the intro and the premiere, he has gotten pretty much nothing since then, which is all pretty bad. And I feel like he's probably the least defined person on the Titans group, where we don't really know any of his relationships, we don't really know where he stands in the grand scheme of things. Where while he is part of the majority and he is voting correctly, he's probably the only person that we haven't seen like in a clear group yet, or even the people on the outs like are shown being together to some extent. I feel like Charles doesn't even have that, which makes me pretty worried about his long-term prospects as well. I could very well see him going out into swap that's supposed to be happening next week. So again, I feel pretty low on Charles as well, which is why he's here number 17. Now moving on to number 16, and we have another relatively invisible person. However, at least this person got content this week, and here we have Scott. And Scott finally appears on the show, and he does have some interesting content, like he does break down a strategy of wanting to be as malleable as possible, and that he wants people to see him as a ball of sunshine. And while this could be alluding to him potentially getting a visibility spike later on, kind of like what we saw with Benji on Champions versus Contenders, I still feel like Scott is a pretty unlikely winner considering how inconsistent his edit has been up to this point, which is why he's here at number 16. Now moving on to number 15, and we are finally moving on to a bigger character on the show, and here we have Kelly. And Kelly has been doing more of the same shtick here, where she's been a pretty over-the-top character, having some pretty funny confessionals, but also being a pretty terrible player at that, where first up you have her decision to flip on Tobias, which is a pretty bad move. While she does prop it up as an intentional move, it's also a bad move because she's keeping around Alex, someone who has an actively worse relationship with Kelly compared to Tobias, so she's flipping to keep someone who is actively gunning for her. And plus, by flipping her vote, she's coming off as an unreliable ally to the people that want to keep her in the game, which makes it even less likely that they'll want to keep her around in the future. So I feel like that's pretty bad. We get to episode 5, where while she doesn't get voted out, had that vote played out as normal, I feel like once it became a non-elimination round, she's kind of just cut as an expendable number, as people kind of see her as the most likely to screw things up for the Titans. And then we get to the latest episode where, while she does have the right idea of not telling them about the full extent of the twist, she also spreads this really dumb lie of her claiming that she was part of the majority alliance, only to then be voted out of the tribe, which obviously caused a lot of people to get suspicious of her there. And in general, I find Kelly to be a pretty questionable player, and someone who probably isn't long for the game. It wouldn't shock me if she's out relatively soon, but again, she's at least on the show, so at least that's something. But again, she's probably not winning, so she's here number 15. Now moving on to number 14, and we have another player who's been on the show a lot recently, but also has a lot of their flaws on display, and here we have Caroline. And obviously this was a visibility spike for Caroline, which at least is something, though at the same time we are starting to see her position really crumble, where obviously during a lot of the week she got suspicious of Mark, Valeria, and Viola, which to be fair, she is in the right for this. She is correctly identifying that that group is tight, but the way that she goes about handling the suspicion is all wrong, to where she ends up walking in on all the conversations, and through that we actively see Mark, Valeria, and Viola recognize that Caroline's onto them. And in turn, they want to turn on her. We even see in this latest episode that they very much considered flipping the vote to take her out, and as while the plan doesn't go through, I feel like it is clearly setting up that she is going to be on the losing side of this battle between Mark, Valeria, and Viola, to where she probably will be taken out soon. And yes, while she did get some personal content here and there, I feel like the fact that she's being dunked on to such a degree that it's pretty clear that she's going to be taken out soon, I just can't really justify her being any higher than number 14. Now moving on to number 13, and this person did technically go up, even accounting for the boots from this week. However, I still feel like this person's pretty unlikely to win, and here we have Jaden. And again, I still don't think Jaden's likely to win. He's clearly not in a strong position on his tribe right now, with him being aligned with the other bros. He was also the secondary target at this tribal, which isn't great, and he does ultimately concede to the majority in taking out Nathan. But again, he's obviously in a pretty bad spot right now, and kind of similar to what I said last week, I feel like the show is kind of treating him as a joke, to where the bulk of his content is him just being this bro, like bench pressing people while Mark's looking for the idol. You also have him in this latest episode being confused over who the target is, where Wina told him that Nathan's going home, only to be told later by Viola that Caroline's on the table, and he's just like, oh, I'm confused. So again, I feel like Jaden's pretty unlikely to win. I feel like he's just kind of fodder that'll just be taken out randomly at some point down the line, which is why he's here number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we have another person who had a visibility spike this week, but it's not really enough to prop them up, and here we have Eileen. And obviously Eileen had a pretty big episode in episode 4, really her breakout on the season, where obviously she gets like her intro package, talking about how she does unconventional things, and that she didn't come on Survivor to be in the background, but to be a major force. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of it is circumstantial, where it feels like the main reason she got content in this episode is because she was the main one to come up with this split vote plan between Alex and Tobias. And even then, like even within this episode, she does get dunked on at points. Like during her intro package, even as she's saying that she wants to not be in the background, she concedes that the big personalities are just a lot for her to handle. So I did find that kind of weird. She also admits that she thought she was going to be a leader, but has been a lot more introverted, kind of leaning into her lack of content up to that point, which I don't think is that good for her. And then later in the episode, you have her talking about needing to be Kelly's mother and that she needs to rein her in. All that just for Kelly to flip in the middle of tribal, and for this entire split vote plan that justified her presence in the episode not even going through. So again, it is very much a mixed bag for Eileen here, where she gets all this content out of nowhere, all for it to not really matter by the end of it, and then she goes right back to being invisible afterwards, where episode 5 and episode 6 she gets no confessionals, kind of going back into the background. So again, it is kind of a funny edit for her, but not really one that's leading to a win per se. Again, I feel like Eileen's content here was pretty circumstantial, and even within it, she didn't really get her way here. So I feel like for all those reasons, I feel like she's pretty unlikely to win, so she's here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and kind of similar to Eileen, this person really only got focused in one episode, but even then, I wasn't really sure what to make of it, and here we have Wina. And again, Wina's main focus here comes in episode 6, where he does pretty much concede to allowing Nathan to go home here, where he pretty much just chalks it up to, oh, I'm on the bottom, guess I have no choice but to vote out my closest ally, which again by itself, him voting out Nathan here is not ideal for his game, as he's pretty much still on the bottom afterwards. And at the same time, I feel like it's not really content that's setting up an underdog run per se either, where I feel like we're not really getting the sense that Wina is supposed to be like this major character or an overly sympathetic one either. He's just kind of there for a lot of it. And even then, like he kind of confuses Jaden as well, but where Viola tells him about the Caroline plan. So again, it is kind of a wonky situation. So because of that, I have him here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and I actually had this person really low last week. However, I feel like this person did jump up to a degree, and here we have Alex. And again, I don't think Alex is a likely winner at the end of the day. I still feel like he has too much negativity with this edit, namely with his rivalry with Kelly, that's really holding him back. Then also, he's not in that great of a spot on his tribe right now, though considering they're about to swap, I feel like he could be in a better position because of that. But at the same time, I feel like he is one of the more consistent presences on the show. And while I said earlier that he was probably in a bad position on his starting tribe, I feel like a lot of the he has kind of shifted away from him in recent weeks. Where while, yes, he was a secondary target at this latest tribal, he obviously probably goes home had Kelly not flipped her vote. I feel like with Ferris shifting his focus onto Kirby, I feel like that definitely opens it up for Alex to skate on by as a result. I feel like his edit is not as villainous at this point, considering that he's not in direct opposition to Ferris in the same way that he was before. Now, yes, he's still going after Ferris, but I feel like Ferris has his eyes more set on Kirby at this point compared to Alex. And I feel like through that, I feel like I could see a world where Alex skates his way through more of the game. I feel like he could make the merge at this point. But again, I still feel like he's an unlikely winner by the end of it, so he's here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and these next two players are kind of similar in that while they haven't been getting a lot of content up to this point, I can very well see them becoming breakout characters down the road. But number 9, we do have Raymond. And I feel like Raymond's kind of a mixed bag as well, where in some ways you can tell that there's a fun character there, where obviously he did get his segment during the intro, and then even during episode 5, during the voting confessional, he obviously has a pretty funny moment where he decides to shout out his vote for Kelly, which I did find pretty funny. But even beyond that, he does get some weird content as well, like the fact that he was supposed to be with Garrick and Ferris when they were looking for the idol, only for him to get randomly separated, and it's not really explained how he got separated, but I did find that kind of weird. But at the same time, that is mildly a pro in the sense that we do know that he has some relationships there. We know that Ferris and Garrick seem to trust him. And I feel like those are things that could propel him in the future. And considering where I have those other two placed on the power ranking, I feel like that could definitely benefit Raymond as well. So again, there is definitely potential for Raymond to get more content, both based on the moments that we've seen him, but also based on his position with other people on the cast. But realistically, I still don't think he's a super likely winner, and even then, his visibility spike potential is still largely speculation, so I have him here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have kind of a similar figure, and here we have Sarah. And Sarah's another pretty interesting character as well. Kind of similar to Raymond, we did get some inklings of her personal content early on, namely with her intro package. And even this past week, you have the fact that she doesn't get much focus during the Tobias blindside, a round that she was clearly on the outs for. As again, I was kind of shielding her from the negativity there. And then in the next episode, you have Scott feeling bad for Sarah being blindsided on her birthday. And then obviously they win the reward thereafter. So again, there is some stuff there, but at the same time, I definitely feel like there could have been more there. I feel like as a whole, I was kind of underwhelmed by Sarah's reaction to the Tobias blindside, considering she had said in week 1 that Tobias was her closest ally. So I do kind of hold that against her to a degree. But again, there's still some potential for her to get a visibility spike in the future based off the set that we've gotten so far. And especially with a swap coming, she could suddenly find herself in a new position within the game. So again, there is that potential there, but I feel like with the lack of content we've gotten up to this point, I do have her here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we actually have the person I had at number 1 last week, and here we have Kirby. And I do regret having Kirby at number 1, as she obviously didn't get that much content in the first 2 episodes, and I feel like the placement was largely due to recency bias, which I will admit to up front. But even with that, we obviously have week 2, which was mostly bad for Kirby, where obviously she does get consistent content, but at the same time, we also learn that her move of flipping her votes to make it seem she was in the middle to completely backfire, where we see people talking about how like this was a sneaky move and that they don't really trust her as much. You get episode 5 where she has this whole plan of trying to blindside Ferris, only for Scott to leak the plan to Ferris, and obviously him finding out about that. We get that confessional from Ferris talking about how he trusted Kirby and that it's such a shock that she would turn on him, which is all pretty bad look on Kirby's end. Definitely makes her come off as a villain. And then you have the actual vote itself, where it does seem like she would have been on the outs of this vote had it been a normal round, where it does very much feel like Rihanna would have been taken out there as a way of weakening Kirby in the future, which is obviously pretty bad. And then even in this latest episode, we do get more of the setup with the Ferris and Kirby rivalry, which as I said, previously it did seem like Alex was more so Ferris's focus, but now it feels like Kirby has kind of inherited that to where it does seem like to be the more defining feature on the season at this point. And I feel like based on the content we've gotten, I feel like Ferris is going to be on the winning side of that, which obviously would bode pretty poorly for Kirby. So again, it is kind of a weird position that Kirby is in at this point. And while I feel like she could have some staying power due to her being a big character, I could also see her going out after the swap here due to her being seen as this big player. So again, it is kind of a downgrade from last week in my eyes, which is why she's here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and I'm actually a little surprised this person is this high, especially considering how quiet they were this week. But number 6, we do have Eden. And this was actually kind of a cool down week for Eden, where he only gets one confessional the whole week, that being at the beginning of episode 6. But really beyond that, he doesn't really have much to do here, where even Mark gets more focus compared to Eden, which I did find pretty interesting. It even seems as if Mark has kind of sided more with Valeria and Viola over Eden, so I do question that to a degree. Now, yes, he's still part of a clear group, that being the middle-aged mafia, and I feel like with the cooldown that follows his strong week 1, I don't feel like that's as big of a knock to his winning chances compared to other situations, but I still feel like it was worth mentioning. Again, I still feel like Eden will be a major character across the season, and especially now with the swap looming, I feel like he could definitely take a step up in the following week. But again, I feel like the top 5 people are all people that I feel a bit higher on, so because of that, I do have him here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and I feel like this person is kind of in an interesting spot at this point, and I feel like if it weren't for this latest episode, I would have them a little bit higher. By number 5, we do have Viola. And I feel like before this most recent episode, I probably would have had Viola and Valeria back to back, as I feel like their positions and their edits are pretty similar in a lot of ways. However, in this most recent episode, we do see Viola taking a step forward during the scramble, where obviously she was one of the main people advocating for taking out Caroline this round, even going up to the other guys and telling them about this plan, only for her to not even go through with the plan herself at the actual tribal. And yes, while I think it makes sense from her from an actual game standpoint, as obviously by doing that, it keeps her power structure intact, taking out someone in the minority, but at the same time, it is a knock to her edit in the sense that she is contradicting herself based off what we see on the show versus what she actually does in the game, which is usually a bad thing within the edit. Now, at the same time, I still feel like she is a top contender due to her connections to these major characters, and in a lot of ways, I feel like she's still going to be in a good spot moving forward. But I feel like it's with this latest episode being not ideal for her that does knock her down to number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and I still have this person in top contention. However, I did slide this person down from last week, and here we have Mark. And I am a little conflicted on Mark as well, where he is definitely being set up to be a major character on the season, and he also had a chance this week to express the true relationship of the tribe, that being Mark, Valeria, and Viola. And he is shown narrating a lot of what's going on here. Though at the same time, kind of similar to Viola, he does kind of get knocked here for advocating for the Caroline plan, only to not go through with it at the actual tribal. Again, I'm not saying it's a bad game move to vote out Nathan here, but again, from an edit standpoint, it is kind of a weird look. And also, some of his content was circumstantial, with him looking for the box and then later getting the key to the box to get the idol. So obviously, those things are kind of question marks. But I still feel like Mark is clearly being said to be a major character here. I feel like his relationships with Valeria and Viola will carry over into the later game, which is why he's here number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and again, I'm a little surprised this person is this high. However, I feel like their edit has been pretty solid up to this point, and here we have Garrick. And again, I feel like a lot of Garrick's content has been pretty solid, where he is shown being pretty close to Ferris, who's obviously a major character on the season. And even then, a lot of his content is him making accurate reads. Like in episode 4, he is one of the people to point out that Kirby's vote at the previous tribal was weird. We have in episode 5, we have him presenting the plan to Ferris to break up Kirby and Rihanna. And I feel like that plan probably would have gone through had it been a normal round. So I feel like that's pretty good. I feel like in a lot of ways, Garrick is someone who is clearly being set up to do well across the season, and it wouldn't shock me if he is able to ride through a lot of the game alongside Ferris and Raymond. However, I do also question whether he'll actually be the winner by the end, or if he's just being set up to be a runner-up. Again, I feel like his actual in-game chances of winning is a bit questionable. I feel like his edit up to this point has been pretty undeniable in my eyes, which is why he's here number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and I am once again debating whether this person is too high. However, this person is clearly being set up to be a major character, and here we have Ferris. And again, I feel like Ferris is very much inheriting the George role that we have seen in recent seasons, where he is obviously a big player on the season and also a pretty big character as well. And yes, while people like Kirby are talking about targeting him, I feel like Ferris is clearly being shown being on the right side of that, to where I feel like Ferris will probably win the battle against Kirby by the end of it. So I feel like all that's pretty good. Again, we also have his clear relationships with people like Raymond and Garrick that I feel like could also carry him throughout a lot of the game. And while I think some of his actual moves are kind of questionable, like him wasting his idol on himself at the Tobias tribal, and then also telling people about his new idol in this latest episode, I feel like the show's propping up these moves as being pretty good. Particularly the latter one, where he is shown talking about how he's using this idol to save himself from multiple rounds. So again, I feel like Ferris is clearly being propped up by the show to a large degree, and I feel like he will probably be a major character on the season. Though at the same time, I feel like, obviously, there's the risk that he'll become too big of a character and that he will eventually be taken out as a result. But I feel like with the amount of setup that he's gotten to do well across the season, and with him being shown being in the right more often than not, I do have him here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels at this point is Valeria. And I feel like Valeria's content kind of reminds me in a lot of ways of Liz's from Heroes versus Villains. Again, I kind of compare those two in the preseason, but I feel like on the actual season, it is kind of playing out where we see Valeria being clearly attached to two major characters on the season, that being Viola and Mark. But I also feel like Valeria has broken out more compared to Viola on the actual show as well as in the game. Where in episode 4, while we see Caroline being on to them along with Mark and Viola, Valeria is the one to get the last laugh, where she gets a confessional talking about how Caroline's been spying onto them and that she doesn't trust her. And then in this latest episode, we do see Mark finding the idol with Valeria. And I feel like it's pretty clear based off this that between Valeria and Viola, that Mark is probably closer to Valeria compared to them. So I feel like that's also a pretty big thing helping Valeria out here. And I feel like with this trio being established as the true relationship on the Titans tribe, I feel like that'll be a pretty big force on the season moving forward. And with Valeria having opportunities to weigh in on the game and for her to give her thoughts on these big things happening to her game, I feel like that causes her to stand out over someone like a Viola who has been undercut at this point in the edit. And while Mark has been the bigger character of the duo, I feel like Mark could also just be set up as a big character taken out down the line. And with Valeria getting enough content to stand out, that could make her the viable alternative to Mark if he were to be taken out, to where I could see Valeria very well winning. So I feel like mixing all those things together, I feel like Valeria probably is the most well-rounded edit up to this point, which is a big reason I have her here at number 1. And there we go, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I'm covering other shows as well, such as The Traders US Season 2, as well as Survivor 46, which will be airing soon, so you can look forward to power rankings on those shows. I'm on Patreon, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description, and you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.